Matthew McConaughey adjusted his baseball cap low over his eyes as he stepped out of his vintage Lincoln into the humid Austin evening air. He had opened this restaurant 3 years ago, but rarely had the chance to observe it operating without the fanfare his presence typically created. The neon sign of Greenlight's Grill flickered against the darkening Texas sky, casting an amber glow across the parking lot. Matthew slipped his sunglasses into his pocket and made his way toward the back entrance, determined to experience his establishment as any ordinary customer would tonight. The rich aroma of smoked brisket and cornbread welcomed Matthew as he slipped through the kitchen's swinging doors with practiced stealth. He nodded casually to a young sous chef who did a double take, but remained professional enough not to make a scene. Matthew moved through the bustling kitchen, observing the synchronized dance of his culinary team with quiet pride and appreciation. He made mental notes of small details, the precision of the plating, the communication between staff, the energy that pulsed through his vision brought to life. Selecting a corner booth with a view of the entire dining room, Matthew settled in and accepted a menu from a server who hadn't yet registered who he was. The restaurant had the perfect balance of energy and intimacy that he'd envisioned when opening it. He ordered a glass of bourbon from the specialty list, one that he had personally curated with the head bartender during those early planning sessions. The amber liquid arrived promptly, and Matthew took a slow, appreciative sip while observing the genuine happiness of patrons enjoying their meals. The restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter, exactly the atmosphere Matthew had wanted to create when he first conceived of this place. He noticed the details: Texas limestone walls, reclaimed wood tables, and photographs of sprawling hill country landscapes that he'd taken himself. Matthew felt a sense of accomplishment watching families share meals, couples leaning in close over candlelight, and friends raising glasses in celebration. This was more than a celebrity vanity project. It was a genuine expression of his Texan hospitality and culinary passion. As Matthew savored his bourbon, his trained actor's ear caught something discordant amid the restaurant's pleasant symphony of sounds. It was faint, but unmistakable. A hitched breath, a stifled sob coming from somewhere near the service station. He straightened in his seat, eyes scanning until they landed on a young woman in the server's uniform, her back to the dining room as she hurriedly wiped her eyes. Something about her posture spoke of more than just a difficult customer or a kitchen mishap. There was genuine pain there. Matthew debated with himself about what to do next. He hadn't come here to be recognized or to step into his celebrity persona. Yet, something about the young woman's hidden distress tugged at him in a way he couldn't ignore or dismiss. He signaled to his waiter and ordered a glass of water, then scribbled a note on a napkin asking if the crying server was all right, signing it simply, "A concerned customer in booth 12. The waiter nodded, taking the folded napkin without question. The waiter approached the service station and discreetly handed the note to the young woman, whose name tag read, Sarah. "John?" Matthew watched as she unfolded the napkin, reading the message with red-rimmed eyes before glancing over at his dimly lit corner. Sarah seemed to hesitate, gathering herself before tucking the napkin into her apron pocket and returning to her duties with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Matthew recognized that mask. He'd worn it himself on sets when personal problems threatened to derail a day's shoot. 20 minutes later, as Matthew finished his bourbon and contemplated ordering the house specialty, the waiter returned with a folded paper tucked beneath his water glass. "The server asked me to give you this, sir," he said, before disappearing to attend to other tables. Matthew unfolded the note, which read, "Thank you for your concern. I'm okay, just received some bad news about my dad's health. Can't afford to miss this shift. Your kindness means more than you know." The simplicity and honesty of her words struck him profoundly. Matthew observed Sarah more carefully now as she moved between tables, the way she maintained her composure, delivering food with a smile despite her personal struggles. There was a quiet dignity in how she carried herself that reminded him of his own mother's resilience. He noticed other details too: her worn but polished shoes, the way she helped an elderly customer with his coat, how she discreetly refilled water glasses without interrupting conversations. This wasn't just someone doing a job. This was someone with exceptional character facing difficult circumstances. As Sarah approached a table near Matthew's booth, the overhead light caught her face at just the right angle, and a customer exclaimed, "Didn't you graduate from Austin Community College last month? I saw your speech." Sarah nodded with humble acknowledgement. Matthew's interest deepened as he overheard her explaining that she had indeed given the valedictorian address while working 2 jobs, including this one at Greenlight's Grill to support herself and help with her father's mounting medical expenses. Her quiet determination was palpable. Matthew signaled for his check, an idea forming as he watched Sarah efficiently handle her section while carrying this invisible burden. He'd created this restaurant partly because he believed in creating opportunities and community, not just serving good food. He recalled his own struggles before fame found him, the people who had extended kindness when he needed it most, and the philosophy that had guided his life. Just keep living. Perhaps this encounter wasn't coincidence but an opportunity to embody that very principle. Matthew made his way to the manager's office where his longtime friend and business partner Carlos looked up in surprise. "I thought you were in Louisiana shooting that new project," Carlos said, standing to greet him with a firm handshake. Matthew settled into a chair across the desk and gestured toward the dining room. "Tell me about Sarah," he said simply, watching as recognition and understanding crossed Carlos's face, followed by genuine respect for the young woman in question. Carlos leaned back in his chair and shared what he knew. Sarah had worked at Greenlight's since it opened, starting as a dishwasher and working her way up. Despite taking a full course load and caring for her ailing father, she had never missed a shift. Her dad was diagnosed with cancer last year, Carlos continued, his voice lowering. Today, she got news that his treatment isn't working as hoped, and they're running out of options, both medical and financial. But she refused to go home when I offered. Matthew listened intently, remembering his own father's health struggles years ago and how those challenges had shaped his worldview. He had built this restaurant on principles of community and giving back, not just as a business venture or vanity project. "Do we have that education assistance program running yet?" Matthew asked, referring to an initiative they'd discussed months ago to help employees pursue further education or manage unexpected life challenges, an idea inspired by Matthew's own circuitous path to success. Carlos pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. "We've got the framework mapped out, but funding hasn't been finalized because you've been tied up with filming," he explained, spreading the documents across the desk for Matthew to review. Matthew scanned the paperwork with focused attention, occasionally nodding as he absorbed the details of the program they had envisioned. One that would support employees facing exactly the kind of situations Sarah was navigating with such quiet grace. "Let's implement it immediately," Matthew said decisively, pulling out his checkbook. "I'll personally fund the first year until we can incorporate it properly into the business model, and Sarah should be our first recipient." Carlos smiled knowingly at his friend's characteristic generosity, watching as Matthew wrote out a substantial check that would launch the program and provide immediate relief for Sarah's situation. "Always knew there was a reason I went into business with you." Matthew tucked the folder under his arm and made his way back into the dining room, where Sarah was now cleaning a recently vacated table. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her or create a scene that would draw attention. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his distinctive drawl immediately causing Sarah to look up, her eyes widening in recognition as she realized the concerned customer was actually her famous employer. "Mind if we have a quick conversation when you get a moment?" Sarah led Matthew to a small staff break room, her hands trembling slightly as she closed the door. "Mr. McConaughey, I had no idea. I'm so sorry if I seemed unprofessional out there. I promise it won't happen again." Matthew shook his head gently, his kind eyes meeting hers. "First of all, it's Matthew. And second, you have nothing to apologize for. Carlos told me about your father, and I wanted to talk to you about something important." Matthew carefully explained the employee assistance program they were implementing, watching as confusion, then disbelief, then cautious hope crossed Sarah's face. "We want you to be our first recipient," he concluded, sliding the folder across the small break room table. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the folder. her eyes scanning the documents inside that detailed medical assistance, flexible scheduling, and continued full pay during any necessary leave she might need to care for her father during his treatments. "I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes again, but different tears this time. "This would change everything for us. But I can't accept charity. I've always worked for what I have." Matthew leaned forward, his expression earnest and understanding. "This isn't charity. It's investment in someone who embodies everything this restaurant stands for: hard work, resilience, and caring for others even when facing your own storms. You know, I've always lived by this idea of just keep living, finding meaning and joy even in the difficult chapters of our story," Matthew shared, his voice taking on the thoughtful cadence that had become his trademark in interviews and speeches. Sarah nodded slowly, recognizing the phrase from interviews she'd read about him. "That's what got me through school while working here and taking care of Dad. Just one day at a time, finding something to be grateful for, even on the hardest days." They talked for nearly an hour in that small break room, working out details and addressing Sarah's concerns about accepting help. Matthew listened more than he spoke, recognizing the importance of preserving her dignity while providing genuine assistance. By the end of their conversation, they had reached an agreement that felt right to them both. Sarah would accept the medical assistance for her father, but would also help develop the program for other employees, adding her insights from both sides of the equation. When they emerged from the break room, Sarah's manager gave her a questioning look, clearly wondering if she needed to go home. Sarah shook her head slightly, a new determination in her stance as she picked up her serving tray. Matthew watched with admiration as she returned to her tables, handling each interaction with renewed purpose. There was something powerful about witnessing someone choose to keep moving forward, despite the weight they carried. It reminded him why he'd started this place. Matthew returned to his booth, ordering the house specialty, as he continued his quiet observation of the restaurant. Other patrons had begun to notice his presence now, but respectfully gave him space, a distinctly Texan courtesy he had always appreciated. He watched Sarah navigate the dining room with grace, occasionally catching her eye and exchanging a brief, understanding nod. There was something profoundly satisfying about connecting with someone on a human level, beyond the celebrity facade or employer-employee dynamic. As the evening wound down and the last customers departed, Matthew remained, sipping coffee and jotting notes about improvements for the restaurant. He had always believed that meaningful projects required continuous attention and refinement. The staff moved through their closing routines with practiced efficiency, occasionally stealing glances at the famous owner who had chosen to spend his evening among them rather than at some Hollywood event or exclusive gathering of celebrities. Carlos gathered the staff for their nightly meeting, with Matthew choosing to sit among them rather than standing apart as the owner. The gesture wasn't lost on the team, who visibly relaxed as Matthew began to speak about his observations. "I saw something special tonight," Matthew began, his voice warm and sincere. "I saw people who don't just serve food, they serve experiences, connections, moments that matter. That's what we're really about here, and y'all are nailing it." Matthew then shared the news about the employee assistance program, careful not to single out Sarah or mention her situation specifically. "We're a family here," he said, "and families support each other through the tough times as well as celebrate the good." "Ori." The staff responded with enthusiasm and genuine appreciation, many sharing glances that suggested they too had faced challenges that such a program might help address. Sarah stood quietly at the back, her eyes conveying gratitude without needing words. When the meeting concluded, Matthew helped the team with their closing duties, wiping down tables, stacking chairs, and even washing a few dishes alongside the kitchen staff. No task was beneath him, a philosophy that had guided his approach to both filmmaking and business. Sarah approached as he was hanging up his borrowed apron, her composure fully restored, though her eyes still held the weight of her concerns. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate," she said simply, extending her hand to her famous employer. Matthew shook her hand warmly, then surprised her by asking about her valedictorian speech. "Carlos mentioned you graduated top of your class while working 2 jobs. That takes extraordinary discipline and heart. What did you talk about in your address?" Sarah's face lit up as she described her speech about perseverance and community. How no achievement is truly individual, but is supported by a network of people who believe in you. Matthew listened intently, recognizing a wisdom beyond her years. After saying goodnight to the staff, Matthew offered Sarah a ride home, aware that her car was in the shop, another detail Carlos had mentioned during their conversation. She hesitated briefly before accepting, too exhausted to face the long bus ride. As they drove through the quiet Austin streets in his Lincoln, their conversation flowed naturally, touching on books, films, Texas landscapes, and eventually circling back to her father's situation and the practical next steps they would take together. When they arrived at her modest apartment complex, Sarah impulsively invited Matthew in to meet her father, a devoted fan who had followed Matthew's career since his earliest films. It would mean the world to him, she explained, especially now. Matthew didn't hesitate, following her up the narrow stairwell to a small but immaculately kept apartment where Thomas Williams sat in a recliner, his thin frame wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening, his eyes widening in disbelief at their visitor. "Well, all right, Matthew said with his signature phrase, moving forward to shake Thomas's hand. The older man's face transformed with joy, momentarily transcending the pain and worry that had become his constant companions. Sarah watched as her father and her employer talked like old friends, discussing classic cars, Texas football, and the philosophical outlook they surprisingly shared. In that moment, she saw her father not as a patient, but as the vibrant man he had always been. Before leaving, Matthew crouched next to Thomas's chair, speaking quietly about the assistance program and his personal commitment to ensuring Thomas received the best possible care. "You raised an extraordinary daughter," Matthew told him. "Now, let us help you both." Thomas's eyes filled with tears as he gripped Matthew's hand. "I've always admired your work," he said, "but tonight I've come to admire the man behind it even more. Thank you for seeing my Sarah's light the way I always have." Matthew arrived at the restaurant the next morning for a scheduled meeting with Carlos and their financial team. They worked through the details of the assistance program, officially naming it the Green Lights Community Fund, in keeping with the restaurant's theme. By afternoon, the framework was solidified, the paperwork prepared, and the first actions taken to assist with Thomas's treatment options. Matthew felt a sense of purpose and connection that sometimes eluded him in the more artificial world of Hollywood. Thomas began an experimental treatment program at a leading cancer center, his spirits lifted by this unexpected turn of events. Sarah continued working her shifts, now able to focus fully on her customers without the crushing weight of financial uncertainty. Matthew, back on set in Louisiana, received regular updates from Carlos about both the program's implementation and Thomas's progress. Each report reinforced his belief in the ripple effect of compassion, how one action could create waves of positive change. A local Austin newspaper ran a small story about the Green Lights Community Fund, focusing on the program's impact rather than Matthew's involvement, exactly as he had requested. The article featured quotes from employees about the security and dignity the program provided. The story gained traction online, with many praising the initiative as a model for how businesses could genuinely support their workers. Matthew declined interview requests, preferring to let the program and its recipients remain the focus rather than his celebrity. 3 months later, Matthew returned to Austin and visited the restaurant again, this time openly as the owner. Sarah greeted him with news that her father was responding well to treatment and had even started a support group for other patients. More surprisingly, applications to work at Green Lights had tripled, with many citing the community-focused atmosphere and genuine care for employees as their primary reason for wanting to join the team. What had begun as a private act of kindness had transformed the restaurant's culture. Inspired by the program's success, Matthew and Carlos began planning to expand both the restaurant and the assistance fund. They envisioned a network of Green Lights establishments, each functioning as a community hub as much as a dining destination. Sarah, having demonstrated exceptional leadership skills, was offered the position of Community Outreach Coordinator for the growing enterprise, a role that would allow her to use her communication abilities while maintaining a flexible schedule for her father's ongoing care. Thomas stood beside his daughter at the opening of the second Greenlights location, his cancer in remission though the journey had left its marks. Matthew invited them to cut the ribbon together, a symbolic acknowledgement of how their story had shaped the restaurant's evolution. Local media covered the event, with several reporters noting how unusual it was for a celebrity-owned business to maintain such authentic connections with its staff and community. Matthew characteristically deflected praise to his team and the program participants. At the opening celebration, Matthew gave a brief speech that captured the heart of what Greenlights had become. "This place exists not just to serve great food, but to remind us that we're all just walking each other home," he said, his words resonating deeply with those gathered. Sarah followed with her own remarks, speaking eloquently about how communities are built through small acts of recognition and care, moments when someone notices another's pain and chooses to respond with genuine compassion rather than turning away. Over the next year, the Greenlights Community Fund expanded to include educational scholarships, emergency housing assistance, and wellness programs for employees across all locations. What had begun with one crying server had evolved into a comprehensive support system. Matthew ensured that each new manager understood the origin story of the fund and the values it represented. "We're not just in the restaurant business," he would tell them during training. "We're in the human connection business. The food is just our medium." When a major business magazine wanted to profile Matthew's innovative approach to employee relations, he agreed only if Sarah could be featured as the program's co-creator. The resulting article highlighted how authentic care for employees translated to exceptional customer experiences. Other restaurants and businesses began implementing similar programs, creating a movement within the industry that prioritized employee well-being as integral to business success rather than viewing it as an optional extra or marketing strategy. Fully recovered, Thomas became a regular presence at the original Greenlights location, often sitting at the bar sharing stories with customers and occasionally playing his guitar during special events. His genuine warmth and resilience embodied the restaurant's spirit. He and Matthew developed a friendship based on shared philosophy and appreciation for life's unexpected turns. "Sometimes the detours become the journey," Thomas often said, a perspective that resonated deeply with Matthew's own "just keep livin'" approach. 2 years after that first encounter, Matthew again visited the restaurant unannounced, taking the same corner booth and observing the bustling environment he had helped create. The place had evolved while maintaining its essential character and purpose. He watched as Sarah, now in management, trained a new server with the same patience and attention she had always shown. When their eyes met across the room, her smile conveyed everything that needed saying about how far they had both traveled. That evening, as Matthew prepared to leave, he overheard a customer asking Sarah about the framed photograph near the entrance, a simple black and white image of a corner booth that seemed unremarkable to casual observers, but held profound meaning for those who knew the story. Sarah's response captured the essence of what had unfolded from that pivotal moment. That's where someone once noticed another person's pain and chose to respond with kindness. Everything you see around you grew from that single moment of genuine human connection. Thank you for experiencing this story. If you enjoyed it, please hit that subscribe button. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, and stay tuned for more captivating stories on this channel.